Welcome to this session, What Every Teacher Needs to Know About Decoding and Phonics. I'm Robin Dixon, Pre-K through 5th grade ELA Social Studies Consulting Teacher, and I will be your presenter for this session. Let's begin by exploring our learning intentions and success criteria. Our learning intention for this session is as follows. Today we are learning the skills students need to effectively decode in order to read. Our success criteria. You will be successful when you can list the progression of skills needed to learn to decode effectively, understand how this impacts the kind of instruction you will need to provide in your classroom, and to determine how best to assist students to become successful decoders for new words they encounter. Should you have questions on the information presented in this session, please do not hesitate to email me at my email address that you will see listed on the screen. The goal of this presentation is to walk you through the various stages that students work through in order to learn to decode words as they read. And this process starts from the earliest ages all the way through the school years. And so what we're going to start with first is something called phonological awareness. And phonological awareness is something that develops starting at the age of 2 and proceeds all the way through the age of 6 or 7. And phonological awareness is a broad skill that includes identifying and manipulating units of oral sound. And phonological awareness is the umbrella term that is used for auditory language skills. And these are the skills that are at the very beginning of language understanding and manipulation. Phonological awareness at this point has nothing to do with the letters in the alphabet. It has to do with the sounds in spoken words. Phonological awareness refers to the child's understanding that spoken words are made up of sounds. So you'll see this is the very, very beginning skills that students need in order to read and decode words. Please remember, as stated earlier, this is oral manipulation of sounds. At this stage of development, students are not writing graphemes, and graphemes are simply the written representation of a letter or sound. You'll note on the screen that phonological awareness encompasses all of these skills: words and sentences, symbols, onset rhyme, alliteration, and so on. And we will be going deeper into what each of these means in just a few moments. So as we review phonological awareness and the ages at which this develops, please remember that phonological skills are the earliest skills that readers develop. These occur at the beginning of approximately age 2 to 3 and progress through the school years, preschool years. And these continue through the ages of 6 or 7. But it is also important to note that older students can benefit from these skills as well, especially if they struggle with reading or spelling. And at the end of this section, we will spend a little time looking at activities that we can do to develop phonological awareness with older students. So all students need work in this phonological awareness, and even though it's associated with preschool, we need to think about the benefits to our older students as well who are struggling. When we look at developing and acquiring phonological awareness skills, this is a typical order that students tend to learn these skills in. They first learn the skill of rhyming. Think about the use of nursery rhymes and songs in the preschool years. Develops those skills of rhyming. Students then learn the ability of segmenting words into syllables. They then focus on syllable blending. Next is the focus of identifying words with the same beginning sound. Students then progress to identifying words with the same ending sounds. Beginning sounds are easier to acquire than ending sounds for students. Students then progress to segmenting words into individual sounds. They work on sound blending, and then manipulating sounds within a word, and then letter-sound correspondence. So keep in mind that even though this is the typical order, that there could be variances within students or groups of students. This is, however, a generalized order of how children tend to learn these phonological awareness skills. So let's take some time to look at each of these skills more in depth. The first skill that students work on is the ability to determine rhyming words. And there are two terms that are important when looking at rhyming, and that is the term onset and the term rhyme. The rhyme is simply the part that makes two words rhyme. It's having the same ending. For example, an, can, ran, fan, for example, all share the rhyme of an. The onset is simply the beginning sound that's different in each of those words. So this student should be able to say that the words cat and hat rhyme because they have the same rhyme. It's the onset that is different. They share the same rhyme of at, but the words have different onsets, which are k and h. If we look at the words pot and pet, this student should also be able to determine that those words do not rhyme. They have the same onset of the p sound, but they do not have the same rhyme. One has OT and one has ET. When we look at the next skill of segmenting words into syllables, this is the ability of students to realize how many syllables are contained within a word. And at this stage, you'll often see students clapping to determine syllables within a word. So if I say the word chair and how many syllables are in that word chair, you'll often hear younger students do this and hear one clap for one syllable. And that same student should also be able to see that the word morning has two syllables. Morn for syllable 1 and ing for syllable 2. If you teach older students and you're working with an activity with syllables or asking students to sound out words and telling them the number of syllables, you'll often see students clapping silently to themselves, or they might appear to be thinking about syllables because they might be clapping in their minds. So this is a skill that students will use all the way through school. The next skills are syllable blending and syllable segmentation. When we look at syllable blending, this is the ability to blend sounds, syllables together to make words. So for example, if I say butter and fly, can you put them together to make the word butterfly? That same student can also work with syllable segmentation. And this is just saying to a student, can you clap the words into syllable? So let's clap butterfly into its syllables. But-ter-fly. So syllable blending and syllable segmentation, you'll see that there's a strong connection between the ability to blend and segment as well. The next skill that typically develops is the ability to recognize if two words share the same beginning or initial sound. This tends to be easier. It is the first sound that is heard within the word, so students have an easier time holding on to that first sound and recognizing if those are the same. So you should be able to say to a student, do sand and some have the same beginning sound? And their student will respond, yes, because they have recognized that both words begin with the s sound. And that same student should be able to recognize that hand and red do not have the same beginning sound. Hand starts with the sound, and red starts with the sound. Students will then develop a stronger ability to recognize that words have the same ending sound. This is a more cognitively taxing task for students than beginning sounds because students have to hold on to multiple sounds until they reach the final sound in a word. For example, if you say to a student, do snag and hug have the same ending sound? Students should be able to understand that yes, they do, because they both have the g sound at the end of the word. Now notice in the word snag, we have 3 sounds to process through until we get to the g sound. Students have to process s, n, ah, those 3 sounds to get to the final sound. And in the word hug, they have to process 2 sounds to get to the final G. This same student should also recognize that 10 and mad do not have the same ending sound because 10 ends with the n sound and mad ends with the d sound. Students then develop the ability to segment words into individual sounds. So let's look at our first 2 examples. How many sounds are in the word cup? A student should be able to tell you there are 3 sounds. And we know that the sounds are k, p. Those are 3 sounds. We can also say to that same student, how many sounds are in the word off? The student would respond 2. And we would know that the sounds are the and the f sound. Now notice what we're doing in the next part of this skill. What sounds do you hear in the word play? And a student would respond, p, a. What sounds do you hear in the word stop? S, t, p. They would respond with 4 sounds. So notice how we're changing the sophistication of this skill to simply telling the number of sounds to telling what the exact sounds are. So it definitely impacts the level of sophistication that students need to be able to do, but they need to be able to tell how many sounds and then also tell the sounds they hear. Then we work with sound blending, and this is putting sounds together to make a word. I'm going to say some sounds and I want you to put them together to make a word. What word do the sounds b, a, t make? Put a pause between each of those sounds and then a student would respond with the word bat. What word do the sounds s, t, a, p make? And the student would respond stop. Notice that there's a short pause in between each sound so that they have to blend those together. The next element that students work on is manipulating the sounds within a word, and this is changing or removing a sound. So in the first example on the screen, it says, what word do I have if I take the t sound off of the word tan? And students would respond an. So in their mind, they're taking the word tan, taking off the initial sound, and seeing what's left. The next example says, what word do I have if I take the s sound off of the word stop? And the student would respond top. Now this one's a bit trickier because we have ST and we know that many words start with S and T, and students are used to thinking of those sometimes together. So we can change or remove sounds within words. Students then progress to letter sound correspondence. So now we are taking and breaking down into the individual sound or phoneme. So saying to a student, what sound does the letter K make? And the student would respond, K. What sound does the letter F make? F. What sound does the letter Z make? Z. Notice that we are now moving to the individual sounds, which again is called a phoneme. All of these skills working with sound will lead to our next area of reading development. So let's take a moment to watch a skill that's going to be essential not only when we're working with letter sounds, and phonological awareness, but also our next skill of phonemic awareness and also with phonics. So as you were hearing me read my sounds, it is essential that we are saying all sounds correctly. Only saying the sound represented by the letter without adding an extra vowel at the end of this letter. This is what it means to clip our sounds. And not clipping sounds adds an extra vowel sound that affects reading the word correctly and spelling the word correctly. For example, B is not B. B is B. Notice when I say B, it adds that extra U sound. C is not K. C is K. So let's take a moment to listen to all the sounds read correctly.
A, apple,
A, apple, a.
B, bat,
B, bat, b.
C, cat,
C, cat, k.
D, dog,
D, dog, d.
E, egg,
E,
F,
egg, f.
F, fish,
F, fish,
G, gum,
G, gum, g.
H, hat,
H, hat,
I, igloo,
I, igloo, I.
J, jug,
J, jug, j.
K, kite,
K, kite, k.
L, lamp,
L, lamp, o.
M, man,
M, man, m.
N, nut,
N, nut, n.
O, octopus,
O, octopus, ah.
pan,
P, pan, p.
Q, queen,
Q, queen, qu.
R, rat,
R, rat,
S, snake,
S, snake, s.
T, top,
T, top,
U, up,
U, up,
V, van,
V, van, v.
W, wagon,
W, wagon, w.
X, fox,
X, fox, x.
Y, yellow,
Y, yellow, y.
Z, zebra.
Z, zebra, z.
So you'll notice how all of those sounds were clipped so that there was not an extra sound being added to the word. This is extremely important when we're working with students from our youngest learners all the way through our oldest learners, because it really does impact their ability to say the words correctly as well as spell the words correctly. And let's not forget our older students. Our older students will sometimes struggle with phonological awareness as well, so we want to work on these same skills in the order that you would work on them for a younger student. You might be surprised. You might think that your older students know how to rhyme or that they know how to take off a sound, manipulate that sound, but you might be surprised to find out that more students struggle with phonological awareness than you might anticipate. Use wordplay to develop this skill. Skills such as do these words rhyme? We might say, what's a word that rhymes with cat? Or what's a word that rhymes with stop? And allow them time to determine words that rhyme. Word chaining. Take the word coat. And can you change the beginning sound in coat to m? What's the new word? Moat. Now change the t sound to the n sound. What's the new word? Moan. So giving our older students a chance to play with language and develop stronger phonology skills can be very important and beneficial. Also provide pictures to accompany any spoken language. And breaking words into smaller parts also benefits students. So let's take a moment to watch a video and see what this skill might look like with our oldest learners.
Hey there, this is Carrie Clark with SpeechAndLanguageKids.com and the Speech Therapy Solution. Today I am answering a question from Lynn about phonological awareness skills for older children who are already reading. So this would be a child who is into reading instruction and is still struggling with those phonological awareness skills. And actually I have a post going live today on the main website that is all about dyslexia, which is generally a problem with phonological skills in older children. So if you are struggling with a child with dyslexia, this is appropriate for that, or children who are having reading problems based on phonological processes. You may want to be looking into some dyslexia help as well. So for these kiddos who are having trouble with the phonological awareness skills, you still want to work on those same phonological processes, those same phonological awareness skills that you would for younger students. And if you would like detailed information on how to work on each of those different skills, these are skills like rhyming, blending, segmenting. If you want detailed information on how to work on those, you can go to speechandlanguagekids.com/PA, and that will give you all my phonological awareness tips and activities for you. But for older kids, the modifications that you're going to want to make is you still are going to want to start with the easiest skills. So go all the way back to, I'm trying to remember, I guess rhyming is first. Go all the way back to rhyming and then go up through segmenting and blending of syllables and then on down to specific sounds, individual sounds. So work your way through that process the same way you would for a younger kid. Start with the easier ones and only move up once they've mastered that. And then also it's going to be important when you have an older kid working on these skills that you really get them to focus on the sounds and not the letters at first. So you're going to have to break it down to, okay, we're not talking about letters. I want to hear what sounds you hear. And it's going to take them a while to understand that you are asking for them to say stuff like B instead of B. So if they've already had that instruction, you kind of have to back down and say, okay, I know that you know how to do the letters, but right now we're talking about sounds, and really help the child understand the difference between a sound and a letter. Now, the other thing that I like to do for this, I'm sorry, my voice is kind of going, I don't have much of a voice right now, so I apologize. Hopefully you can still hear me. The other thing that I like to do for kiddos who are working on sounds versus letters in phonological awareness with older kids is I like to use letter tiles such as these. So you can see here I have the letter tiles for cat, okay? So I'll have one tile per letter or per sound in the word, and I like to start with words that do have one letter per sound. Instead of, if you did one that had a silent E or something like that. Start with just one letter per sound. And then what I'll do is I'll put these on the table for the child. See if I can do this. So I put them on the table upside down. So I would have it like this. So let's say that we're working on blending. So I would say, okay, I have a word with 3 sounds in it. So this is what the child sees, the back of the tiles. And I'll say the sounds are k, a, t, and then I will have the child think about it. K, a, t. And then once they figure it out, then we're going to flip it over so they can see what the actual word was. So this is a good way to work on what you hear first and then reinforcing that with what letter it is. Okay, so I'll do that. I'll also do for if I'm having them, if we're doing blending and then we're also trying to use those letter correspondences. So I'll have them say, I'll say k, a, t. What sound do you hear first? Or, okay, sorry, back up. I'll say cat. What sound do you hear first? There's 3 sounds in cat, cat. And the child will say cat. I hear k first. And I'll say, you're right. So we'll flip around the C. So you heard k, okay? Now what sound do you hear in cat? And they'll say k, ah. I hear ah. And I'll say, you're right. So we'll flip it over and we'll see, oh man, I lost my C. So we'll see that was the A. And then we'll say, okay, what sound do you hear at the end of cat? And they'll say, oh, I hear a T or a T sound. And then you'll say, yep, and that's a T. Sorry, I dropped the C. So you can see that that way you are still using the letters, you're still using the tiles, but they're focusing on what they hear first and then reinforcing it with the letters. So this will kind of pair with the instruction that they're getting in school. Once you get them doing this pretty comfortably with words that have 1 letter per sound, then you want to start working on words that have pairs of letters that represent 1 sound. So for example, if my word was eat, that's actually 2 sounds, E and T. And this is exactly how I would do that. So I would tell the child, okay, we'd have it flipped over, but I would have them separated. This is hard to do in the air. So I'd have them separated on the table like this, so there was a space. And I would say this word has 2 sounds, but one of those sounds is made up of 2 letters. So I'll say this is eat. The word is eat. What do you hear first? And they'll say, I hear E. And you say, you're right. E is made up of E and A in this word. And then what's the other sound you hear? E, T. It's a T. So then you'll turn it over. So just kind of pair them off by the the sounds that they make so that the child can see, okay, well, I still hear 2 sounds, but I see 3 letters. Okay, so when you're working on some of those more complex words, you can use that strategy. Finally, my final tip for you is to use the child's spelling words for practice on these. If there are words that the child is having trouble with on their spelling list, you might as well work them into your therapy activities so that you can practice them. Most of those are probably not going to follow the 1 sound per letter, 1 letter per sound rule. So you'll be able to talk about some of those sound pairs and how different letters go together to make different sounds. All right, I hope that helps. If you have other questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll get back to them as soon as possible. Thanks so much, and have a great day.
She did an excellent job showing you how you can improve phonological awareness skills for older students. Games are extremely important for students in learning how to manipulate those sounds. And these are also activities that you can apply when we are working on phonemic awareness, which we will get to in the next segment of this presentation. So let's take a moment to pause, jot, and reflect on what you have learned about the earliest skill of phonological awareness. So take some time to pause and reflect on this segment of the presentation. What was new learning for you? How does this learning pertain to the grade level you teach? And what are your next steps in learning and understanding phonological awareness and how to apply it within your classroom? Phonemic awareness is the ability to identify and manipulate individual sounds in spoken words. While phonological awareness is a general term describing a child's awareness that spoken words are made up of sounds, phonemic awareness is a specific term that falls under the umbrella of phonological awareness. Phonemic awareness refers to the specific understanding that spoken words are made up of individual phonemes, not just sounds in general. The phoneme is the basic building block for spoken words. In English, for example, there are an infinite number of possible words, but there are only about 44 or 45 phonemes within the English language. This is a key indicator of how children will learn to read in the first 2 years of formal reading instruction. Research has showed us that struggling decoders struggle in the phonological processor within the brain. And this is the area that we need to make sure that our students are strong and solid in, is the area of phonemic awareness. When we look at phonemic awareness, you'll see on the screen the age ranges at which various skills develop. From ages 2 to 4, phonology and phonemic awareness are beginning to develop. Ages 5 to 6, which we would consider late preschool and early kindergarten, are full of phonemic awareness development and phoneme blending. In fact, late preschool and kindergarten are prime development ages of phonemic awareness for students. At ages 6 to 7, students begin to be able to work on phoneme or sound segmentation. At ages 7 and above, the focus becomes on phoneme manipulation within words. When we look at phonemic awareness, again, we're referring to the individual sounds within words. We are not working with letter correspondence, but we're working with sound correspondence. And the number of letters does not always equate to the number of sounds. In the word bat, we do have a direct correlation. We have 3 letters and 3 sounds. B, a, t. In shop, however, we have 4 letters and 3 sounds. We have the sound of sh, ah, p. So again, we are working with students to understand the number of sounds within the word, not the letters. Let's look at the word task. We see 4 letters and 4 sounds, but in the word past, we see 6 letters and 4 sounds. The 4 sounds are p, a, s, t. Again, we're working on that sound level, and we're working on manipulating the individual phonemes within words. And on the screen, you will see a representation of the skills that students work through within phonemic awareness. And remember that phonemic awareness is what enables you to hear and manipulate the smallest units of speech called phonemes. Your phonemic awareness gets the credit when you identify that the word has 3 sounds in the word map. And this is what we saw on the screen earlier. It is also important to note that David Kilpatrick in 2015 tells us that phonemic awareness is the essential part of the process of storing words in one's word vocabulary. That is, the body of words, high frequency or not, that an individual can decode quickly and effortlessly. Phonemic awareness is what allows us to anchor the sounds in a word to the written sequence of letters that represent those sounds. That is a process called orthographic mapping. Studies have shown that students with better phonological awareness skills can handle this mapping process more proficiently than those with weaker phonological skills. The goal of decoding is to build words into our sight word memory, and phonemic awareness allows this to happen. And the slide on the screen shows you the skills that students must be able to do and manipulate at the phoneme or sound level. When you're working with students who are working on phonemic awareness, a method that is often used is tapping sounds. So I want to show you a video that shows how to tap sounds within words.
I'm going to do some demonstrations with tapping out words for foundations. First, we're going to start with digraph. Okay? A digraph has 2 letters but only 1 sound, so it gets 1 tap. Ch, I, chip. Okay? We also have 3-letter glued sounds. Okay? When we tap those out, we use our 3 fingers and we glue them together. So you would tap this out, l, ung, lung. For our syllable types, we'll first start with cat, which is a closed syllable, or short vowel sound. Each letter gets its own tap. K, at, cat. Vowel consonant E syllable type. Okay. The E is silent, it does not get a tap, so this is just tapped with 3 fingers. J, o, k, joke. The open syllable, each letter gets its own tap. M, e, me. For the vowel team syllables, vowel team only gets 1 tap also. So this is b, ate, bait. For the R-controlled syllable, again, it only gets 1 tap. B, d, bird. If you have a word with a suffix, any of the suffixes, they do not get tapped out. Ed, er, est, they don't get tapped out. All you do is tap out the base word, and then you read it with the suffix. So again, it would be b, d, bird, bird, birds. Okay? You do not tap out trick words, because they don't follow the English language. And for multisyllabic words, you do not have to tap out each syllable. You only need to tap out the syllable that's causing the trouble. So if you need to scoop and read admit, but maybe the second syllable is causing the trouble, they just tap out mit. M, it, mit, admit. Okay. One more syllable type is the consonant LE syllable. And since the E is silent, you do not tap that sound out either. This is bugle. And if this is the problem, that's the syllable that's causing the problem, you would do g-ol. Put it together. Bugle. Thanks.
So in this video, she showed you how to tap individual phonemes, but also showed you how students work to group chunks of words called syllables and blending those syllables. And we'll talk more about syllables later in this presentation. But she did an excellent overview of showing how to tap sounds within words. If you're a primary teacher, this is something that you will use with the CR Success Phonics program. And if you're a teacher of an intermediate grade, talk to any primary teacher and visit a classroom to see how tapping looks in a classroom. Let's spend a little time digging into the different skills that students need to be proficient with when we look at the phoneme or sound level. The first is phoneme isolation. This is hearing and isolating the individual phonemes or sounds in spoken words, and this represents the first layer of skilled phonemic awareness. Isolating phonemes entails knowing that a word is made up of a sequence of sounds and that the individual sounds and words can be differentiated from one another. So on the screen you will see some examples of this. If we say to a student, what is the beginning sound you hear in the word basket? And the student replies, B. What is the final sound you hear in the word ask? K. What are the sounds in the word dog? D, a, g. So taking a longer word and breaking it into its individual sounds. The next skill is phoneme blending. And as we move up the pyramid, we come to a slightly more complex phonemic awareness skill, and this is phoneme blending. Phoneme blending, which is basically combining sounds, involves listening to and pulling together isolated sounds or phonemes to create words. And this process requires a student to hold the individual elements in his or her mind as the word is created, which also activates and challenges the working memory. So you'll see on the screen some examples of how this would look. For example, saying to a student the sounds p, I, g, and students blending that word to tell you the word is pig. What sound, if I blend these sounds, what word do I get? P, a, play, or clasp, k, s. Notice that these are all one-syllable words, but the number of letters varies, so students can blend phonemes to create words. The next level of phoneme skill on the pyramid is that of phoneme segmentation, and this is breaking words into their individual phonemes or sounds. So let's look at these examples on the screen. So I see the word smile. And students should be able to tap that word into the four sounds of s, m, I, o. Notice that there are 4 sounds but 5 letters. We want students again focusing on the sounds, not the letters. The example, the third word down, says clock. Notice there are 5 letters but 4 sounds. K, a, k. Or race, a, s. So students are taking words and breaking them into their smaller sounds. Students can also add phonemes or sounds to make new words. For example, look at the word we. Add the d sound to the end of the word, and what new word do you get? You get the word weed. Or the word ale. Add the sound to the beginning of the word. What new word do you get? Rail. Or the word run. Add the z sound to the end of the word. And what new word do you get? You get the word runs. So we can add phonemes to the beginning and the end of a word. The next skill on the phonemic ladder is deleting phonemes from words. So when we are deleting phonemes, we are taking off a sound. Let's look at the examples on the screen. The word rake. Say the word rake without the sound, and a student would respond, ache. Saying to a student, say the word plate without the t sound, and a student would respond, play. Or we can also delete and replace. So take the word corn. Say to a student, replace the k sound with the t sound. What new word do you get? And the student would respond, torn. And the final level on the phonemic awareness pyramid or ladder is that of substitution to make new words. Phoneme substitution is the most advanced of all the manipulation skills on the pyramid, and these require a student to know how to both delete and add phonemes. In a phoneme substitution exercise, a student might be asked to drop the final short I in kit and replace it with the long I sound. And it's important to note that phoneme substitution is the critical breakthrough skill a child needs to teach themselves how to read new words. So it is an extremely important skill, and David Kilpatrick in 2015 once again says, training in phonemic manipulation has substantial long-term impacts on reading. And you'll see examples of phoneme substitution on the board or on the screen. Taking the word put, replacing the sound with the sound. And what new word do you get? Pit. Taking the word hit and replacing the t sound with the sound. And what new word do you get? Him. Taking the word farm, replace the f sound with the h sound. What new word do you get? Harm. So you'll see that this is indeed a very critical and also taxing exercise for students. But once students are able to substitute phonemes, they are well on their way. When we look at phoneme skills for older students, again, we can't negate the importance of this skill for our older readers. You might be surprised if you asked some of your older students to do these skills, how tricky it is for them to manipulate phonemes and words. And the first thing that you should do is assess their knowledge of phonemic awareness. And this can occur on the PASS test, which is a screener for phonological awareness. We can also use the QPA, which is the Quick Phonics Assessment, to determine their knowledge of the skill. And once again, just like phonological awareness, you want to work on the same skills in order that you would for younger students. And it is critical that instruction in phonemic awareness is explicit and systematic for our older learners. You can also use games to teach these skills. We alluded to some of these during the phonological awareness session of this presentation. Again, same types of things, having students do practice with word chaining or having them guess the word, as you saw on the video, are great games to try with older students as well. We talked about sound chaining, and we also talked about guess the word. As we come to the end of this section of the presentation, let's take some time to pause and think about our learning about the skill of phonemic awareness. Take some time to pause the video and reflect on this segment of the presentation. What was new learning for you? How does this learning pertain to the grade level you teach? And what are your next steps in knowledge and learning concerning phonemic awareness? The next element of reading development that we will explore is Airy's phases of reading development. And on the screen you will see the 4 phases of reading development. And Linnea Airy is a researcher who developed a theory about how word reading skills develop, and she published these findings in 1995. The first that you'll see on the screen is the pre-alphabetic phase, and this happens around pre-K to the kindergarten years. At this stage, a child has little or no alphabetic knowledge and relies on visual cues. This student sees the golden arches and knows that it is McDonald's. Remember that in our previous part of this presentation, we were looking at how reading applies to oral language and listening skills within phonology and phonemic awareness. So again, in the pre-alphabetic stage, we have not taught specifically the letters and sounds and how those look in writing. So the next phase is the early alphabetic phase, and this begins around kindergarten to 1st grade. At this stage, a child begins to learn letter-sound relationships, However, the child may lack consistency in his or her ability to do so. They may also guess at words. They may look at a word and guess that that word is cat or dog, but not really knowing how to look at the letters to do that. They may rely on the visual cues of pictures within books. The next phase is the late alphabetic phase, and this happens around 1st to 2nd grade. At this stage, a child attends to every letter in a word. He or she is able to convert letters into sounds and words. And the final stage is the consolidated alphabetic stage, also known as full alphabetic. And this happens around grades 2 to 3rd and on up. And at this stage, a child begins to use chunks or words rather than individual phonemes or sounds. Phonics skills such as digraphs and diphthongs are mastered. And the next section of this presentation will focus on phonics skills and specifically that consolidated alphabetic phase. You will see on the screen additional information about each of these stages. In the pre-alphabetic stage, again, students read words by memorizing their visual features or guessing visual words from their context. In the partial alphabetic phase, students recognize some letters of the alphabet and can use them together with context to remember words by sight. For example, reading a book that has a picture of a dog. Using that visual cue of the picture of the dog and the first letter of D and the sound of D and combining those in order to determine the word. Not really reading the word by its sounds, but using other cues to assist. In the full alphabetic phase, readers possess extensive working knowledge of the graphophonemic system, and they can use this knowledge to analyze fully the connections between graphemes and morphemes in words. They can decode unfamiliar words and store fully analyzed words within memory. And when we look at this stage, this is simply the ability to take what they hear and write. A grapheme is a written symbol representing a sound. For example, the letter R has the sound. Hearing the sound and writing the letter R to represent that sound. When we look at the consolidated alphabetic phase, students consolidate their knowledge of grapheme-morpheme blending into larger units that recur in different words. So this means taking, for example, the sound of ch and writing that as the letters CH. And so as students become familiar with being able to write individual letters and sound to represent the sounds, they are able to take larger chunks of words and write those graphemes to represent those sounds. So we have spent some time learning about Erie's phases of reading development. Let's take some time to pause and reflect on this segment of the presentation. What was new learning for you? How does this learning pertain to the grade level you teach? And what are your next steps in applying Erie's phases of reading development to your classroom? Once students have developed phonemic awareness and phonology, when we think of learning to read, we typically think of phonics, and that's the next part of this presentation, and we will spend some time delving into the skills and teaching of phonics. So once students have acquired their phonological and phonemic awareness, we start looking at more formalized instruction through phonics. And phonics instruction is a way of teaching reading that stresses the acquisition of letter-sound correspondences and their uses in reading and spelling. Phonics instruction also teaches the relationships between the letters of written language and the sounds of spoken language. Children's reading development is dependent on their understanding of the alphabetic principle, which we saw earlier in Erie's phases of development. The idea that letters and letter patterns represent the sound of spoken language. Decoding is the act of sounding out words using phonics. The primary focus of phonics instruction is to help beginning readers understand how letters are linked to sounds, which we call phonemes, to form letter-sound correspondences, and this spelling pattern, and to help them learn how to apply this knowledge to their reading. When we think of formalized phonics instruction, we often think of this in the pre-K through second grade grade band, but phonics instruction is also important for many of our students in grades 3 through 5 who are still struggling to master phonics, and we will spend some time at the end of this section looking at how that might look to teach phonics to older students. So again, let's look at what phonics is. Again, phonics is making the connection between phonemes and the written symbol, which we call a grapheme. It is teaching letter-sound relationships, including sounds for common letter patterns, so that a reader can decode words. And it is also teaching the alphabetic principle, which is the relationship between phonemes and graphemes. And again, we looked at that earlier in Aries phases of development. And again, the goal of phonics instruction is to help students learn to effectively decode words they encounter, and also to teach them that there is an organized, logical, and predictable relationship between written letters and spoken sounds. Learning that there are predictable relationships between sounds and letters allows children to apply these relationships to both familiar and unfamiliar words, and to begin to read with fluency. Children are taught, for example, that the letter N represents the sound N, and that it is the first letter in words such as nose, nice, and new. When children understand sound-letter correspondences, they are able to sound out and read or decode new words. Think about how we did this principle orally during phonemic awareness and phonology. We're taking that relationship that we have used in an auditory manner, and now we're applying it to a written system of decoding and writing words. There are some basic principles that we need to understand when talking about teaching phonics. And these principles are as follows. First of all, when letter sounds are put together, they become words. We put together the sounds of n to make the word ran. Another principle of phonics is that letters appear in different places in a word, and it can appear more than once. For example, the word pop. We have the p sound and the letter P at the beginning and end of the word. Students also need to know that there are two types of letters in the alphabet, consonants and vowels. Students need to know that the vowels are A, E, I, O, and U, and sometimes depending on Y, if it's acting as a vowel, as in baby or cry. So students need to know this. They need to know the difference between consonants and vowels. Another basic principle of phonics is that all words need a vowel. Even the shortest two-letter words contain a vowel. For example, me or to. Students also need to know, and teachers need to know, that two consonants together can make one sound. For example, CH makes the ch sound. Q and U always come together and make one sound of qu. Q is never by itself. Q and U always go together. When two vowels are together, the first one is dominant and the second one stays silent. So this occurs such as in the words boat and read, but this is not always true, because we know that there are times that we can have vowel teams that form new sounds. For example, OI as in the word coin, makes the oi sound. So we cannot always teach when two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking. That holds true in some vowel teams, but not all vowel teams. So students need to be taught explicitly the vowel teams that form new sounds. And we also need to teach students that, and understand as teachers, that specific combinations of two or more letters are called letter blends, such as ST and STR. As we look at teaching phonics, there are several principles that need to be kept in mind as phonics instruction occurs. The first is that phonics instruction needs to be systematic. For example, we need to teach individual letters and sounds before we teach combining letters and sounds to make one sound. Phonics instruction also needs to be explicit, meaning that we need to teach students explicitly how to break the code of phonics. Learning how to read and decode should not be a secret, but it should be something that all students have access to. So we need to be very explicit in teaching phonics to students. It is also sequential, meaning that there typically is a scope and sequence to teaching phonics skills, and we'll explore that in just a moment. Phonics instruction also needs to be cumulative, meaning that we are using prerequisite skills to build on newer skills. For example, learning the letters and sounds helps students to use that knowledge in order to look at longer words that involve digraphs and trigraphs, for example. It is also diagnostic, meaning that as we're teaching instruction, we need to keep in mind and diagnose how students are doing in their learning progression, so that if we see a mismatch in what students are doing and what they should be learning, we need to be very diagnostic and take care of that inaccurate learning or that little learning pit where that student is struggling, so that we can make sure that they have solid phonics instruction and that there are no gaps in their learning. On the board, you'll see a typical learning progression within phonics. We've talked quite a bit about how letters and sounds begin first. We then talk about and teach short vowels. So for example, short O of ah or short A of ah, teaching those short vowels. We typically then progress to long vowels. And then students progress to two vowel words, meaning a vowel team. So what happens when we have O and A together, for example? Students typically then learn digraphs, which is two letters representing one sound, and you'll see the examples of SH, which make sh, CH, which represents the sound of ch, and the digraph of TH, which represents the sound of th. So think about how this applies to what we've learned earlier. For example, in the word shop, we have three sounds but four letters. So we're building on that phonological awareness, so students are understanding that two letters can make one sound. We also then progress to blends, and the examples on the screen are BL, ST, SM, GL, and these are a little bit trickier because each letter represents a different sound. So in BL, we have two sounds. So in the word blend, we have 5 letters and 5 sounds. So the next slide that you'll see that we're going to work through also represents another order of thinking about how to teach phonics. And this is also aligned to the Quick Phonics Assessment. It's called the QPA, and it's something that we use in our elementary grades to track progress of learning different phonics skills. So students are always taught to read VC and CVC words. So that stands for vowel consonant and consonant vowel consonant. So as we work through this slide, when you see the C, it represents the word consonant, and V represents the word vowel. And you'll see examples on the screen, me and cat. Those are the easiest words to read and decode because there is a direct one letter and one sound correlation. And we are also looking at short vowel sounds, and we know that those are much more consistent for students to read. We know that short A always makes the A sound, for example. Students then progress to digraphs, and we talked about these earlier, two letters that represent one sound. CK, for example, represents the K sound. After digraphs, students progress to consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant words, and consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant words. And you'll see these look very similar to CVC words. We are simply adding another consonant sound. Again, these are easier because there is a direct one letter, one sound correlation. Students then progress to silent E words. We know that silent E words are predictable. We have consonant, vowel, consonant, silent E. So the predictability makes these easier for students to learn the pattern and sounding out CVC words. Students then progress to R-controlled vowels. R-controlled vowels are a little bit trickier to learn because the same rule does not apply to each letter or vowel and the R. So you can make an R-controlled vowel with any of the vowels, A, E, I, O, or U. And on the screen you'll see farm. When we have an A and an R together, it makes that new sound of R, kind of like a pirate sound. When we have OR, as in the word torn, notice that we still hear that long O sound. Now in the word fern, you'll notice that we do not hear the E sound. Remember that we did say earlier that each word has to have a vowel, and the word fern does. We just don't hear that E sound in the word fern. So students need explicit instruction in how the R affects the reading of the word and how those R-controlled vowels may vary from vowel to vowel. Students then progress to advanced consonants, and the examples that we have on the screen are QU, which makes the Q sound, WR, which makes the sound. If we look at GN, as in the word sign, that the G is silent. So in advanced consonants, that also entails also looking at the use of silent letters in words. Students then progress to vowel teams. We have examples on the screen. EA, which is predictable, makes the long E sound. But notice in UI, as in the word fruit, the U and the I combine to make a new sound. The double O's can make two sounds. It can make the sound as in book or the oo sound as in scoop. So students need to be taught explicitly how to read words with various vowel teams. And then students progress to two or more syllable words. Up to this point, we have looked at one syllable words. And once students have mastered one syllable words, they progress to two or more syllable words. And finally, students are then taught affixes. An affix is just the term for a prefix and a suffix. On the screen, you will see the scope and sequence within first grade and second grade CR Success, which is the program that our pre-K through second grade students use to learn phonics. So this might be a good time to pause the video and read through the scope and sequence and see how this looks in first and second grade. And once you have finished examining the scope and sequence, you may start the video and proceed to the next slide. We're going to take a minute to look at a few specific phonics rules that should be embedded in phonics instruction. And this is going to provide 15 specific rules to teach students. When you access the tiny URL, it will take you to this website. And what we're going to do is just look through a few of these specific rules that are important for you to know as well as your students. So as you scroll through, the first one that you'll see are vowels and syllables. You'll see short and long vowels, and we talked about how short and long vowel sounds are taught explicitly in phonics instruction. We've also talked about the silent E. We've talked about blends and digraphs. We've talked about vowel digraphs, our controlled vowels. And number 7 is important. This is called the schwa sound. And we sometimes call the schwa sound a lazy vowel sound, and it makes more of an sound. Think of the word trouble. You hear that sound. Or if you say the word banana, notice that it doesn't make a true short A sound or long A sound. And the schwa is extremely important because it is the most common vowel sound that words will make, or that vowels will make. We need to teach students the rules for soft and hard C, for soft and hard G. And you'll see on the screen that it tells you explicitly what these rules are. It says when the letter C is followed by the vowels E, I, or Y, it usually makes its soft sound. Now, do we know that there are exceptions? Yes. But we just need to teach those exceptions. We need to say this is the rule, but here are 3 words that don't follow it. It also gives us the specific rule for hard and soft G. We also have the fizzle rule for the letters F, S, Z, and L. Words that end in K or CK. The J sound and the Ch sound. We also get into spelling rules because we know that spelling is the encoding of our decoding. So there's a strong correlation between decoding words and the ability to spell. So there are also specific spelling rules to teach students, such as dropping the E when adding ing, doubling the consonant, as in the word run, to running, and the rule of Y, because we know Y can function as not only a consonant, but also a vowel. So it's critically important that we teach students these rules and break that code for them so that they can decode and ultimately become strong spellers. And a final note on phonics and students who struggle with phonics, specifically older students. We know that poor readers rely on skills such as picture clues to help determine a word. So we want to make sure that we are giving students specific instruction in how to decode words as they read. This might occur as direct instruction as part of a guided reading group or an intervention time to specifically teach students how to decode words. We also know that automaticity in decoding has positive effects, and these include word recognition. Students are able to increase the amount of words that they have within their sight vocabulary. And a sight vocabulary is simply words that students recognize automatically without having to go through the process of decoding them and sounding them out. Each student has a different sight word vocabulary. What is considered a sight word for one student might not be for another student. For example, perhaps the word phoneme was a new word for you that you were having to sound out, or a student was having to sound out. As that student has learned that word, and as if you have learned that word, it becomes an automatic word for you as you're reading. We also know that the ability to be a strong decoder leads to increased comprehension because students are no longer spending all of their mental energy decoding and sounding out the word. They are freeing up their mental capacity to automatically decode words and focus on the meaning within a text. It also leads to increased fluency, and we want students to be fluent readers as this also has a positive impact on comprehension. And fluency is simply the ability to read something as it's written without having to stop and sound out each word. Think about if you've heard a student who's trying to decode every word as he or she is reading. That reader is not fluent and not focusing on comprehension, but merely just trying to know what the words are. And spelling. As stated earlier, spelling is the encoding of the reading process. So having a strong skill of decoding leads to a strong spelling skill as well, as we have taught those specific rules for spelling and phonics. We've gone through quite a bit of time looking at phonics. So let's take a moment to pause the video and reflect on this segment of the presentation. Within this segment of phonics, what was new learning for you? How does this learning pertain to the grade level you teach? And what are your next steps in building your knowledge of phonics and how to apply this to your classroom? Once students have mastered the phonics skills, they then start taking those skills that they have learned with single-syllable words and applying them to multisyllabic words. And a multisyllabic word is simply a word that is made up of more than one syllable. And we know that a syllable is the smallest pronunciation of a word that has a vowel sound with or without surrounding consonants, forming the whole or part of a word. So for example, the word unit is a multisyllabic word. The first syllable is un, the second syllable is it. Or we could look at that word as you, the long U, and then knit. But either way, that word has two syllables. We often think of multisyllabic words and a syllable as a single unbroken sound of a spoken or written word. And syllables are sometimes referred to as the beats of spoken language. Think of this with poetry. And when we look at the different types of poetry that have different patterns, such as the first line has to have 7 syllables, the second line 5 syllables. So when we're looking at multisyllabic words, or pardon me, syllables in this part, often think of poetry with this as well. And multisyllabic words are words that are made up of one or more syllable type. And on the screen you will see an acronym for the 6 syllable types, and that acronym is CLOVER. C for closed syllables, L for consonant E syllables, O for open, V for vowel team, E for silent E, and R for controlled vowels. So it's how these syllable types are joined and formed together that make multisyllabic words. So let's spend a moment examining and defining the 6 syllable types. The first type of syllable is a closed syllable. And in a closed syllable, this ends in a consonant, and there is one vowel followed by one or more consonants, as in the word bed. We saw this when we talked about CVC words and CCVC and CVCC words earlier in this presentation. And if students can effectively decode closed syllable words, they will be able to read 50% of the words they encounter on a daily basis. The next syllable type is an open syllable, and an open syllable ends in a vowel. The vowel has a long sound, as in the first syllable of the word decide. Notice that in an open syllable, that vowel sound can continue on. If we said D, we could say that long E sound as long as we had breath. The next syllable type is vowel consonant E, and this is what we think of as the silent E, or CVC silent E words. The final E is silent, and it makes the vowel before it long. So if we look at the word tile, we see the silent E at the end of a word, and we see the I, which becomes long. The next syllable type are vowel teams. And a vowel team is simply 2 vowels that are next to each other, and sometimes these say a new sound, as in the word coin, or if we look at the word read, we hear that long E sound. But in a vowel team, we have 2 vowels side by side. The next syllable type is the consonant LE, and this is found in words such as handle, puzzle, middle, and the syllable is always comprised of the consonant and the LE. We never have the LE alone. There's always a consonant. Now, in the word handle, it's DLE. But notice that in puzzle and middle, we have the same consonant. So if we look at puzzle, we have the first syllable of puz and the second syllable of zul. And for middle, we have the first syllable of mid and the second syllable of dull. And again, notice that even when we have DLE, for example, we still have a vowel within that word. And you'll notice that it kind of makes that lazy schwa sound, handle. We kind of hear the sound for the schwa in that word. And finally, we have R-controlled vowels. And this contains a vowel followed by the letter R. And the R controls the vowel and sometimes changes the way it's pronounced. And we talked about this earlier. And we see an example on the screen, car. We hear that R sound that we talked about earlier, that pirate sound. And sometimes the R controls the vowel sound, as in fern. We don't hear that vowel sound necessarily. So as you're teaching syllable types to students, a special note on phonics and sounds for EL learners. Students whose first language is Spanish will need extra support and guidance with the phonemes on the next slide. These phonemes do not exist in Spanish or are represented with other letters. So on the screen you will see some of those phonemes that Spanish speakers will need additional explicit instruction with. You will see short vowels, as we've talked about earlier in CVC words. The SH sound has 7 different spellings in the English language, so we need to explicitly teach that SH makes the sh sound. But so can the double S's, or TION, for example. We need to teach the TH sound. We also need to explicitly teach our controlled vowels, as well as the J sound, because the J sound can be made with the letter J, the letter G, and DGE. Z sound can be spelled with Z, as in zero, but also S, as in the word has. The V sound also needs to be explicitly taught, as in voice and very. And then we have this Z sound in the English language. And this sound is made when measure, notice the SUR together make the Z sound, or mirage with the letter G. And finally, the D sound, as in day, ladder, and bad. And when we're teaching multisyllabic words, we understand this, and we also need to make sure that our students understand that syllable types are combined to form multisyllabic words. So for example, the word upset has 2 closed syllables. Potato has 3 open syllables. The word muzzle has 2 syllables. One is closed and one has consonant LE. Now in the word carpenter, we have 3 syllables. We have an R-controlled vowel syllable, a closed syllable, and another R-controlled vowel. In the word promote, we have an open syllable and then the silent E syllable type. And in repeat, we have open syllable and vowel teams. So it's important that students know that multisyllabic words are combined of all of these 6 syllable types, and that's why direct explicit instruction in all 6 syllable types is crucial for students. It is also important to note that it is combining these syllable types that form longer words. We can have words that can have 5, 6, or 7 syllables, for example. And as students progress through school, they'll see more and more words that contain more than 1 syllable type. Think about the grade level that you teach and the words that students see. Think about how many of those words are more than 1 syllable. And also teaching students strategies to decode multisyllabic words are critically important because they need a strategy. And teaching students different strategies to break down words into syllable types and sound out words using those syllable types is a crucial strategy for all learners. There are many intermediate students who come to school and don't have a strategy to sound out words. So it's crucially important that we teach these explicitly to older students so that when students encounter unknown words, they have a strategy. Think about when students get to middle school and high school, the amount of new words that they'll see. At some point, each and every student needs to have a solid strategy to decode new words. Think about yourself as an adult learner. How many times have you encountered words that you've had to use a strategy for in order to decode or sound out? We have spent some time learning about syllable types and multisyllabic words. So let's take some time to pause and reflect on this segment of the presentation. What was new learning for you? How does this learning pertain to the grade level you teach? And what are your next steps with understanding the syllable types in your classroom? So take a moment to pause the video, and when you are ready, start the video and proceed to the next slide. We have now reached the end of this presentation. So in closing, let's wrap up and summarize what we've worked on during this session. So first of all, it's important to realize that there are stages of learning to read words. Today we worked through understanding the stages that students progress through in order to decode words. Each stage is critical. Students must have strong phonological, phonemic awareness skills in order to apply those to phonics instruction. Students can't learn to read without mastering skills in each step. Each step is sequential and necessary. All readers need these skills, as we've talked about. And it's important for you to know these stages in order to best teach students in the classroom and in order to best determine where more instruction is needed for a student or group of students that enters your classroom. So as we've come to the end of this presentation, think about the following questions. What was your biggest takeaway from this presentation? What was brand new information for you? And what are your next steps in learning concerning decoding instruction? What do you need to learn in order to more effectively help your students become strong decoders? So as we reach the end of this presentation, let's review our learning intentions and success criteria to determine if those were met. Our learning intention for this presentation was to learn the skills students need to effectively decode words. Have we met our success criteria? Can you list the progression of skills needed to learn to decode effectively? Do you understand how, under knowing the progression of learning to read words, how this impacts the kind of instruction you will need to provide in your classroom? And finally, can you determine how best to assist students to become successful decoders for new words they encounter? I'm Robin Dixon, and it has been a pleasure to present this session to you. Should you have any further questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to reach me via email, and I would love to meet with you and talk further about how to implement strong decoding skills and strategies in your classroom.